man must do his bit.
Welcome to another edition of The Public Interest, and we continue our discussion on Guyana's foreign policy. My name is David Granger, and we'll be looking specifically at the changes in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs during this new millennium. Early in the new millennium, the United Nations sent an advisory mission to examine the need for reform and restructuring in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You may ask, why was it necessary nearly 20 years ago for the United Nations to send on such a mission to examine the situation in Guyana's Ministry of Foreign Affairs? There are many reasons for that, and this is not a history lesson, but we must examine what was happening in Guyana at the start of the new millennium. This was not a happy time. The People's Progressive Party was already in office for about a decade, from 1992 to 2002. And it was a period of, I would say, deprofessionalization of the foreign ministry. There were some very bloody scenes. I was personally told of a story by the Governor General of a foreign country, in which his son-in-law was married to a Guyanese diplomat, and that diplomat was given 72 hours. This is an ambassador, given 72 hours to quit the country. Children in school, rent to be paid. And that was the sort of chaos that characterized the Ministry of Foreign Affairs between 1992 to 2002. In addition to that, the Guyanese would remember this was the time of the Troubles. So domestically, we had a lot of shooting, we had a lot of narco trafficking, we had what one highly placed public servant called drug gang warfare. And some people started to describe Guyana as a narco state. So conditions were very unstable. And worse still, I think the greatest diplomatic disaster occurred in the maritime zone when the Surinamese Navy expelled the CGX petroleum exploration platform. And I think after that catastrophe, elections were held in 2001, and the government of the day decided it was time to make a change in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But rather than make a change, they made an exchange, which was perhaps not the best thing at the time. The ministry was split in two. So rather than resolve the problem was compounded. That a lot of confusion resulted from that split. You created the Ministry of Foreign Trade and International Cooperation, and then you had the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. At the same time, we had the Office of the President really directing foreign policy. So you had three agencies, MOFTIC as it was called, the Ministry of Foreign Trade, then you had the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and you had the OP. And to make things worse, after the decision was taken after the 2001 general and regional elections to change the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the new minister was not actually appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs. For some strange reason, he was appointed as Minister in the Ministry of the Presidency, at that time a Minister within the Office of the President. So this was Mr. Rudy Insinardi. When he arrived there at this chaotic scene, he realized that the ministry was not achieving the objectives of which it was designed. He had been a professional diplomat. He was one of the founding members of the Ministry of External Affairs. So he was an experienced diplomat. And he realized that the situation in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, when he was appointed, was untenable. And as a result of that, the United Nations sent down this advisory team to examine the conditions in the ministry with an eye on advising on how it could be restructured or reformed. And that was the situation at the time Minister Rudy Insinardi took over. and that is why it became necessary. He was a new foreign minister, and he realized that the old way of doing things that he inherited from 1992 to 2002 could not continue in the new millennium, and that's where we were. So this United Nations mission produced a report. Many people in the Foreign Service never saw the report. Up to now, many people don't even know that there was such a report. And but of course, I have access to it, and I read the report very carefully. And I think Guyanese must ask themselves whether the recommendations of the report were ever implemented. I wouldn't go into all the recommendations today in this program, although it's in the public interest to study that report. But let us look at some aspects of the recommendations. One, of course, was the need to establish the Foreign Service Institute, the FSI, on a sound financial and organizational and operational basis. We must ask ourselves the question today, has the FSI functioned? Does it function? And if not, why not? You cannot run a modern professional foreign service without education. And even though, the ministry will try to attract graduates from the University of Guyana, having a degree in international relations is not enough. International relations are a very wide field. For example, we're surrounded by 3 countries, each one speaking a different language, Portuguese, Spanish, and Dutch. And then we have to deal with countries in the wider community, speaking Spanish or French and so on. So people need to have a grasp of language. And if you speak of economic diplomacy, foreign service officers need to have a good grip of economic matters, commerce and trade and tariffs and so on. And then of course there's international law. People need to understand treaties, because very often, even at consular level, Guyanese may get arrested in KN or in Nevis, and then questions of citizenship and so on arise. So you need to look for intelligent, above average persons who could be given the additional training to equip them for service in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Unfortunately, during the first decade of the PPP's tenure, the issue arose. There was a public debate about it, that some persons were not considered suitable for diplomatic appointments, and I think at that time, the head of the presidential secretariat had some remarks to make about suitability. What happened is that issues of pay, issues of promotion, issues of posting overseas started to arise. Issues of promotion within the Foreign Service started to arise. And some people felt they were being discriminated against. And quite frankly, it is difficult to avoid the conclusion that the best persons were not being selected or advanced for high diplomatic appointments. At that time, you remember that the PPP had something called the Association of Concerned Guyanese. So here and there you found ambassadors who were hard workers in the Association of Concerned Guyanese overseas. Some of them boasted that they hadn't lived in Guyana for 18 or 20 years. So you couldn't tell them, ask them what's the difference between Oriala and Awari. Where is that? Which country is that? They were completely unfamiliar with what was taking place in Guyana. And yet they were appointed ambassadors, and some of them remained there, for 5, 10, 15 years, without any prospect of rotation. So the quality of the persons being selected as diplomats was one thing, but at the same time, young, ambitious, educated professional officers were being kept back. So there's a morale problem, because they joined the Foreign Service. They were not being given the opportunity to serve overseas, and yet you got these persons who were being inserted above their heads as ambassadors. In some cases, the widows of PPP stalwarts were appointed as ambassadors Once their husbands had died, there would be some opening would be found for them. So there was real chaos in terms of the selection and advancement of persons within the Foreign Service. And many of the people in the ministry were quite demoralized. In addition to that, the Foreign Service Institute was not actively engaged in recruiting the best persons for the Foreign Service and equipping them to serve in missions overseas. Now, when you compare the Irish Foreign Service with what is happening in the rest of the Anglophone Caribbean, particularly Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad, it is very difficult to get into the Foreign Service of those countries. Not only do you have to have a first degree, but most frequently you have to have a postgraduate degree, which would equip you to serve not only in the diplomatic field, because diplomacy now involves economics, trade, and so on. So when you compare Guyana with with other countries in CARICOM, you could see that the training given to our diplomats was not at the same level. I don't want to go further than that. So the Foreign Service Institute was not functioning for most of the time. And this is one of the central recommendations of the United Nations report. Let us get the Foreign Service Institute functioning. Up to now, I can't say that I'm no longer in government. I can't say the Foreign Service Institute is functioning. But what I would recommend to you, my friends, if you have any influence, try to persuade the powers that be to make the Guyana Foreign Service Institute a real academic institution. I don't want to go back to my old hobby horse about the Bertram Collins College of the Public Service. You can't have trained public servants without public service staff college. Whatever you want to call it, I think it was a terrible mistake of this administration to disestablish Bertram Collins College, and I think it's a terrible mistake to disestablish or not to operationalize the Guyana Foreign Service Institute. So that was a main recommendation, because it dealt with human resources, it dealt with the morale of the public servants. Another important recommendation of the United Nations report was the need to establish what we call a Foreign Relations Council. I know in any government, maybe in every government, there are one or two individuals who feel they think they know everything, and they are not prepared to listen to advice. Well, in fact, it's not true. People at governmental level need the advice of professionals, of academics, of public servants, of business community. Now, Guyana does not really have think tanks, They have tanks, but there's not much thought given to the issues. There's not much research. And it's a pity, because there are several distinguished persons, ambassadors and ministers who pass through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who have written critically, some maybe not so critically, but there are books by Shriyat Ramphal, by Rudy Sinali, by Rashid Jackson, Cedric Joseph, other books which contain a tremendous amount of information, not only historical information, but information which we need today, because, for example, Cedric Joseph has done one of the best works I've ever seen on the Guyana-Venezuelan controversy. And we're still involved with the Guyana-Venezuelan controversy. So young students, in the Foreign Service Institute, researchers need to be familiar with the works of these former ministers, Sinali, Jackson, Ramphal, and so on, if we are to understand what we need to do in the future. So the Foreign Relations Council brings together academics, it brings together officials, it brings together civil society, it brings together professionals who could really rigorously research and advise on Guyana's foreign policy. Sometimes you get the impression that somebody wakes up one morning and says, oh, let's open embassy there or let's send a delegation there, without giving it much thought. And what is happening now in the world is that foreign policy is very complex, and countries like Guyana have to marshal their resources before they're wasted, in futile expeditions. I remember during the early part of this millennium, we had delegations going to the Middle East, and they brought back nothing. They were poorly planned. The delegations were poorly staffed, and even now we have agreements with dozens of countries, but we don't have the human resources. We don't have the analysis. We don't have the ability to really make use of those agreements, to implement those agreements, and to make them work for Guyana and for Guyana's prosperity. So it is felt, or at least the UN Commission felt, that the establishment of this Foreign Relations Council would review continuously, not the work of the Foreign Ministry alone, but Guyana's foreign policy needs, and provide advice to the government as to how it could improve its standing in the world. It cannot be done by ministers alone. Once ministers get into office, they're quite busy. They go to meetings and they present, they meet diplomats and they attend conferences and so on. You need people in the back room who are doing research. I myself, as president, we had a situation in national security, and we had to set up a national security committee, which reviewed security every week and report to the cabinet. Similarly, the Foreign Relations Council should review foreign policy and report to cabinet and give the minister the best advice. Give the minister the best advice that is available. My friends, when we're speaking about the situation in the world today, it is very, very complex. And if Guyana is to ensure its national interest, we need to have a deep appreciation of what is happening what is happening in the world and what has happened to Guyana as a member of the international community. Now, after we became a republic in 1970, there was a deliberate and a distinctive shift from west to east. And as you know, we moved into the non-aligned movement, and we developed relations with China, Eastern Europe, and Middle East as well. We did not break with the West, but there was a definite shift from west to east. And of course, there are financial, there are developmental, there are ideological differences and new paths. And it also meant that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had to prepare for new languages and new sets of relationships, which were different from the old set of relationships. Now, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has to have the flexibility, the agility to adjust to new conditions. Even here on this continent, our neighbors, there are a lot of changes in Venezuela over the past 20 years or so. There are changes in Brazil, there are changes all over the continent. In the world at large, you have situations, earlier this year, there's a huge embarrassment when people seem not to know the difference between the People's Republic of China and the Republic of China. Well, one is China, with which we have relations, we've had relations for several decades. The other is Taiwan, which is regarded as a province of China. It can cause confusion if people don't have a grip or a grasp of, of the relationship between. We had problems already, between North Korea and South Korea, between German Democratic Republic and Federal Republic of Germany, North Vietnam and South Vietnam. Well, some of those problems have been resolved, sometimes by warfare, but at the same time it means that when you're training a diplomat, that diplomat has to be intellectually agile and alert to make sense of the situation, or else we'd end up in some hot water, as happened earlier this year. In addition to that, our diplomacy is expanding geographically and organizationally in terms of international organization, CLAC and ELAC. Well, I don't think many, the man in the street would really understand the difference. What does OAS do, what does UNASUR do, what does MERCOSUR do, what does CLAC do, what does CELA do? And it means that, again, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has to have a corps of trained diplomats who could find a way among these various organizations. We are a small country, and we must have diplomats who are capable of multitasking, but at the same time they must know to avoid the pitfalls in international relations. So on the one hand, we want the extension of diplomatic relations into Eastern Europe, into Eastern Asia, into the Middle East, and on the other hand, you had an intensification of relations, not only the non-aligned movement, but also all of these other international organizations, apart from the Commonwealth, United Nations, and so on. So this picture is extremely complex, and you cannot send young men and women into the field of international relations without giving them a sound grounding in something like the Foreign Service Institute, and at the same time getting them to understand the complexities of foreign policy. So my friends, these are some of the recommendations, but a very important recommendation of the United Nations mission that should not be overlooked is the need for a plan, a strategic plan. Few ministries, if any ministry at all, could operate an annual budget. Even the Ministry of Public Works. If you're building a highway, the highway doesn't come to an end on the 31st of December. And similarly, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you can't plan on an annual basis. Foreign affairs is a continuous process, and you have to plan at least on a decennial basis, as I proposed at the start of 2020, this decade of development. So you need, my friends, multi-year plans, at least for 5 years or even longer. In other words, you need a strategic plan. And I'm not sure that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I may be wrong, I'm not sure the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has such a strategic plan. Now, we belong to the Caribbean community. It is our closest, Guyana is the headquarters, or hosts the headquarters of the Caribbean community. And it is our closest community of nations, closer than the United Nations, closer than the Commonwealth. But among the four, I would say, larger Caribbean states, Anglophone Caribbean states, Guyana, Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago, the four of us have 34 embassies around the world. Can you imagine 4 poor countries with a population of fewer than 6 million people with 34 embassies? And we have to think about maybe co-location. Many Guyanese may not know that in 1966, both Barbados and Guyana became independent. And for several months, both Barbados and Guyana shared the same High Commission in London. Yes, there was one High Commissioner who spoke for both countries. Yeah, it was very cheap, but it didn't last long. Maybe it was based on some idiosyncratic factor, the friendship between the Prime Minister of Guyana at the time, the Prime Minister of Barbados. But why does a community or part of a community with 6 million people need 34 embassies? You may well ask that. So we're looking at a strategic plan. I'm not sure there's a master plan. I'm not sure that there are initiatives in this direction, but we're looking at a way of dealing with Guyana Guyana's international relations over a long period, not episodic year to year, budget to budget, but where will Guyana be, in 2030? Where will Guyana's priorities be in terms of export, in terms of trade policy, in terms of international relations, in terms of economic diplomacy, and we need a strategic plan to do that. In addition to that, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in most countries, the Minister of Foreign Affairs is perhaps one of the most senior ministers in the cabinet after the Prime Minister. And that's because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has a complex task of coordinating the work of other ministries. Foreign policy is a reflection of internal policy. So if you want to improve trade, if you want to make reports to international organizations about human rights, if you want to project a positive image of your country, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is critical. I know all the ministries are important, but the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has to enjoy the prestige and among the other ministries in order to pull the Ministry of Legal Affairs in, pull the Ministry of Home Affairs in, so that when Guyana presents a position in the international organization, international forum, it speaks for the whole nation. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the spokesman of the nation. It is the international face of the nation. So there must be some coordinating agency, and that strategic plan must recognize the preeminent role of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in presenting economic and human resources and infrastructure and communication. Every other ministry without exception, has to present its case through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So there must be some coordination, and there must be a plan in which the Ministry of Foreign Affairs' role is recognized. So let me try to wrap up what I've been saying over the past few minutes. The United Nations mission, I'm not saying it's a Bible, it's not a text without certain imperfections, but 20 years ago, it at least gave us a sort of blueprint for foreign relations. And I would ask the government to re-examine that blueprint and update it and ensure that the recommendations are implemented. Most important, of course, is putting the Foreign Service Institute on a sound financial and operational footing. We must have diplomats who are given that additional postgraduate training if they are to serve the interests of this republic. Second, we must consider the necessity, and I call it the necessity, of that Foreign Relations Council, so that we don't encourage this one-man show in which one person thinks he knows everything. We must get the best officials, get academia, get the best advice. So we have a Foreign Relations Council which tries to keep, from government to government, from party to party, we try to keep Guyana's foreign policy on an even keel. Then we must consider the changes which are taking place. Foreign policy is dynamic. Every day changes are taking place. You can see what is happening in Eastern Europe. You can see what's happening in East Asia. I think many persons wonder, that twice in a fortnight you see the president of Russia, the president of America having telephone conversations. Things are happening, and Guyana needs to ensure that its own national interests are not jeopardized by these changes. And then, of course, you need to have a master plan so that the unevenness, the anxiety which have characterized the Guyana's international relations are eliminated. There is a tendency, unfortunately, which I noticed last year, for persons to feel that before we came into office, nothing happened. The previous administration was just interested in photo opportunities and going to cocktail parties. It's right on true. And we must get away from that silly habit. It's silly to accuse, every time you go into office, accuse the previous administration of doing absolutely nothing. I mean, the fact that we know before the International Commission to deal with our territorials, a lot of work has been done. And we need to ensure that foreign policy is not subject to party changes, as seems to be happening now. Just trying to dissolve the boards and colleges of the public service, trying to undo everything that the previous administration has done. A lot of good work was done by the United Nations mission to correct the errors of the first decade of PPP administration from 1992 to 2002. And we need to have a similar mission examining the Ministry of Foreign Affairs so that for the next 10 years or so from now, perhaps till 2030 or thereabouts, we don't repeat the mistakes of the past and we give Guyana the best possible foreign service that we could afford from our human resources. My friends, thank you for paying attention to these important issues in Guyana's foreign policy. I wish you a happy new year, and I think all of us would wish that our Ministry of Foreign Affairs would improve its performance during the next year until the next decade. Thank you. May God bless Guyana.